We live in interesting times. This morning's Washington Post carries a story reporting that the British Home Secretary, one Jackie Smith, who is responsible for domestic security, has named people who are being banned from entering Britain for fostering extremism or hatred. One of those 16 that is conservative talk show host Michael Savage. Out there. Well, I confess Michael Savage is not quite to my taste, but I have to admire his response. He said, "Darn, and I was just planning a trip to England for their superior dental work and cuisine." In 2009, your Leadership Institute has already trained 2,015 students and conducted 55 of our schools, which come in 44 types. Since 1979, the Institute has trained more than 72,200 people, most of them students. You have before you at your table a copy of our current school schedule. I would urge that you consider attending one of these schools or sending a friend or two to one of our programs. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce Shelley Tidmore. She'll offer an invocation and lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Shelley is the National Grassroots Coordinator here at the Leadership Institute. She became involved in politics as chairwoman of the University of Alabama Birmingham College Republicans. She advised college Republican chapters across the state as the Northern Caucus Vice Chairman, and she continues to serve, which is always a good idea, as an alumni advisor for her alma mater's chapter. Before coming here to the Leadership Institute, Shelley was marketing director for the Alabama Policy Exchange Foundation. Shelley, come up and give us an invocation. Lead us in the pledge, please.
And this is my first invocation ever that you'll be receiving this morning, so thank you for having me. Let's bow our heads. Before we call to order this morning's Wednesday Morning Wake Up Club, let us take a moment to thank God for all we have been given, for this incredible breakfast for which we will nourish our bodies, and for safely bringing such a fine group of dedicated conservatives together this morning. I am proud to be among you. Let us thank God for the words and wisdom of Arthur Brooks we are about to receive, and for our guests and our generous donors who make this continued success of Allied's mission possible. We ask God's help with our individual and collective efforts in the conservative movement, and to regularly reignite our intentions in ways that make a difference. To our cause, our families, our towns, our state, our nation, to a world grown so small it can be explored and conquered with a click of a mouse, to stay determined during a time replete with distractions and economic uncertainty, to maintain focus with a sense of humor born of the knowledge that we are mortal men and women, and to fuel our work with vigor, stamina, and a hearty spirit. For all this, and a few doses of blessings and grace, we give our thanks. Amen. Now please rise for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Shelley. And now I present to you Christopher Malagisi. He's going to give a report on LI's programs, otherwise known as A Word from Our Sponsors. Chris is also a president of an organization that he put together called Young Conservatives Coalition. It's an advocacy organization dedicated to leading the next generation of the conservative movement and serves as an umbrella organization for leading right-of-center young adult and college groups. Chris is an adjunct professor at American University teaching campaigns and political activism, and has previously worked at the International Republican Institute, traveling to, among other places, to Afghanistan, and also he's worked on Capitol Hill. Chris has a master's degree in public administration from the Maxwell School of Public Affairs at Syracuse University and a bachelor's degree in political science from American University. Come give us a report.
Thank you, Morton. And now a word from our sponsors. Good intro. I like that. Hi, everyone. My name is Chris Malagisi. I'm Director of Political Training here at the Leadership Institute, and I will be giving the programs report for you. When I was asked what specifically to give about other than just the numbers, I wanted to give you a little background on our department, the Department of Political Training. The Department of Political Training houses 17 schools in the Institute itself. We cover 4 major curriculum areas, including political schools, which encompasses schools like our week-long campaign manager and future candidates school, fundraising, which encompasses direct mail and advanced direct mail, and our high-dollar fundraiser schools, our career schools, which run the gamut of everything from our Foreign Service Opportunity School, Civil Service Opportunity School, and our career and intern workshops that we offer for conservatives, as well as our internet online training, which is a little bit that I want to talk about today. 2 of the big curricular areas that we've really tried to focus in on is the necessity to train and place conservatives in the Foreign Service and the Civil Service. And recently we had our 2 largest schools ever that in the history of LI. For our Civil Service we had over 50 students, and for our Foreign Service nearly 30. And the idea is to train conservatives how to break the code, if you will, to get into those industries and to try to make sure that we have good conservative policy, especially in these times. But at the same time, we also have our internet and online training, which is really taking off. We had our training at the Conservative Political Action Conference that had over 120 people attend, just aching to learn about all the joys of Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, and Twitter. Anybody know what Twitter is in here? Just want to take a little poll. Okay, come to our training. We're happy to teach it. But in general, the Department of Political Training is made up of myself and 2 great, wonderful coordinators, Jane Gordon and Ann Lee, who are steadfastly have been putting together over 15 schools already this spring, and we've trained over 530 students so far, about 25% of the numbers that Morton had listed there. If you are interested, we'd be happy to get you more information about those schools, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris. And now to introduce our distinguished speaker, we have Seth Nichols. Seth is a regional development officer here at the Institute. He is responsible for relations with and, as he puts it, educating donors in the Northeast region of the United States. And before coming to the Leadership Institute, Seth worked at the Educational Initiative for Central and Eastern Europe, a conservative nonprofit in Virginia focusing on promoting traditional family values and free markets to the youth in all parts of the former communist empire. Seth also has extensive political campaign experience. He has worked on presidential and Senate races in New York and Maryland, in addition to various state legislative races here in Virginia. Seth, come introduce our great speaker.
Thank you, Morton. Arthur Brooks is the president of the American Enterprise Institute until January 1st, 2009. He was a professor of business and government policy at Syracuse University's Maxwell School of Citizenship and Public Affairs and Whitman School of Management. He held joint appointments in the departments of public administration and entrepreneurship. During his tenure at Syracuse, I met Arthur and his family because he and his wife were both professors at SU, she being a Spanish professor. They developed a family type of relationship with some of the other Spanish professors that were at SU, and mostly a lot of them were all away from their families and their country, which included my mother-in-law, who was from Venezuela. Most of the group became my wife's second family, and in turn it became mine as well. So, and Arthur and I have had several conversations of everything from policy to politics and everything in between, and he always put things so clearly to me. And I wasn't the only one that thought so. Newt Gingrich, a senior fellow at AEI, and I think he was Speaker of the House, was he? And has said Arthur is one of the most satirical people that we have on our side. He's basically our Jon Stewart. He puts things so easy for everybody to understand. Arthur, as Mr. Gingrich has put it, makes it sexy to be a conservative. Arthur conducts research on the connections between culture, politics, and economic life in America. As an academic, he published 6 research articles and 7 books in the past 10 years on subjects ranging from the economics of arts to military operations research. Outside his academic writing, Arthur is a contributing editor to Reader's Digest and a frequent contributor to Wall Street Journal, City Journal, and other publications. His most recent book is Gross National Happiness: Why Happiness Matters for America and Who Really Gets More, and how we can get more of it. In 2006, he published another book, Who Really Cares: The Surprising Truth About Compassionate Conservatism about Americans' Charitable Giving. Every single time I turn around, Arthur's being interviewed by O'Reilly or Glenn Beck or somebody. It's always, every single time. I always happen to catch him. So, including his other activities, Arthur is also the member of the several professional advisory boards, including the John Templeton Foundation. Arthur is happily married to Esther and his wife, and together they have 3 beautiful children, 2 boys, Kimet and Carlos, and 1 girl, Marina. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Arthur Brooks.
Thank you, Seth. Morton, Chris, and Shelley, thank you for having me here today. What an honor to be here at the Leadership Institute. I'm delighted. I had never heard those quotes from Newt Gingrich before this morning, and I have to say, learning that Newt Gingrich thinks I'm sexy, I'm probably going to wake up screaming tonight thinking about that. So thank you, Seth. Thank you. I appreciate that very much. We face a culture war right now in this country. When I say that, you think back to the 1990s, and you think back to what the culture war meant in the 1990s, which was guns and abortions and gay marriage and things like that, but that's not what I mean. When I say we face a culture war in this country, I mean a war over the culture of freedom. Free enterprise is the bedrock notion of American culture. It's at the center of what mainstream Americans truly believe in. Consider these words from Thomas Jefferson. Honor, justice, and humanity forbid us tamely to surrender that freedom from our gallant ancestors, which our innocent posterity have a right to receive from us. Thomas Jefferson is saying that the reason we should care about freedom is not because freedom brings us money and not because freedom brings us international power. He said freedom is a matter of honor and justice and humanity. In other words, it's a matter of our culture. That's what he believed many, many years ago, and that's what we are in peril of losing today. We are in a struggle, a cultural divide that we haven't faced in a long time. In my remarks today, brief as they will be, I hope will make this point very forcefully about what the stakes are. After the current recession that we're facing, I mean, God willing, it will be behind us at some point. There are some indications that we may see the end of it sometime in the next year or two. After it is behind us, we are projecting budget deficits of 4.7% per year after the recession is over, because the current Congress and President have written budgets that guarantee us this very, very large level of debt accumulation. We will be accumulating $9.3 trillion in debt over the next 10 years. Too bad for our posterity, as Thomas Jefferson might have said. And the question is, for what? For what are we accumulating all of this debt? For what are we doing this violence to our free enterprise system? And the answer is this: to bail out General Motors and the United Auto Workers for a stimulus package from our government that's paying for absurdities like, and I'm not making this up, a 36-hole environmentally friendly Frisbee golf course in Austin, Texas. That's what your stimulus tax dollars are going to pay for. Doorbells and Laurel, Mississippi, and a lot of all off-the-shelf social engineering projects that are reason for you and Americans around the country to be irritated. And in point of fact, we do see a lot of rebellion. Tax day, we had 300,000 Americans who spontaneously gathered together in tax day tea parties. Probably some of you participated in some of these demonstrations. My guess is that some of you were out in the streets in your local communities protesting the fact that spending at the federal level is going to move over the next 10 years from 20% of GDP to 23% of GDP, and that tax collections are going to go up as a result, notwithstanding the fact that we are going to go further and further into debt that will be paid for by my children and my grandchildren, who will be guaranteed less prosperity, less success, and less freedom than I was guaranteed because of the social spending and the pork that we're seeing today. People got together on tax day and protested this. They protested this abrogation of our basic freedoms and this violence to our free enterprise system. Now, and they had the data on their side. I mean, I just gave you the data on how bad it is economically, but that's not actually the reason. People were reacting more viscerally, more emotionally than they were intellectually to what's going on here. When you talk to people that were involved in the Tea Party protests, which I did with some detail, you ask them what the problem was. What were they protesting? And the answer was a sort of ethical populism. Not economic populism where we need to take money from the rich and give it to the poor, the kind of populism that we got from the Obama campaign and the current Congress. No, it was an ethical populism that said, I'm a homeowner and I didn't walk away from my mortgage. And I'm a small business owner and I don't want corporate welfare. Or I'm involved in a bank that kept its head and doesn't need a bailout. And right now, it seems like I did everything right, but I'm paying to cover all the people that did everything wrong. In other words, I'm one of the country's makers, but we have a government that's dedicated towards subsidizing this country's takers and has a policy of doing that, and that's just not right. It's a kind of ethical populism that says that I'm honest and I play by the rules and I'm going to pay and I feel like a sucker. That's just not right. So who are these protesters? Who are these people that are angry about the fact that the free enterprise system is under assault, that all of the wrong incentives are being rewarded in this country, that we're turning into an economy that doesn't reward merit, but rather that rewards sharing as defined by the government? Well, if you wonder who these people are, some of them are you, of course, but if you wonder who en masse this group are characterized to be from the current government, you will learn that these are dangerous radicals. The White House and federal government right now is experimenting with the line that conservative protesters are a danger to our homeland security. You will see this more. In point of fact, they are experimenting with this message. They are characterizing you as dangerous radicals. This is the way that you marginalize the grassroots conservative movement. The way that you do it is by saying that these are incipient terrorists. Extraordinary. We have a national policy of not calling terrorists terrorists, but calling patriotic Americans terrorists. This truly is an Orwellian future in the way that we use our language, at the very least. Well, when you really look at the people who are involved in protests right now against the abrogations of free enterprise, these are actually normal people with mainstream views about how our country is supposed to work. And I use mainstream quite on purpose. In March 2009, a little over a month ago, the Pew polling organization asked a large group of Americans whether or not we are better off in a free market economy despite severe ups and downs. That's how the question was worded. 70% agreed. 70% of Americans anonymously polled from a large population said we're better off in a free market economy than a planned economy despite the severe ups and downs. And this is in the middle of the worst recession in 50 years. 20% disagreed, 10% perhaps didn't understand the question, which is pretty typical in public opinion polling. So 20% are on the side of the current Congress. 70% are on the side of the Tea Parties. These are mainstream views that we're talking about here. Yet, we're told that they're fringe interests. We're told that they're potentially dangerous for our country. Now, in a Harris poll last month, the pollsters asked, what's the maximum amount of taxes that any American should have to pay to all sources? And the answer was 16%. Turns out 16%. Well, from my point of view, that's too high. But most people said 16%. The real number is 28%. In other words, there's a lot of room to do good from the point of view of average Americans. Now, in the last presidential campaign, you remember that Joe Biden told us that it's patriotic to pay taxes? A lot of patriotic Americans think that we are paying too much in taxes already. In other words, there is a great mainstream variance with the views of the current administration and the views of the current power in Congress. And we have to stand up for the fact that this is the mainstream, as opposed to the contention that it is not. But my question is, how long will this be mainstream? How long will your point of view be the typical American point of view? And the answer is maybe not forever. The Rasmussen polling organization 3 weeks ago asked a large sample of Americans, which system of government is better, capitalism or socialism? People over 40, only 13% preferred socialism. Under 30, 33% preferred socialism. Now, that's either a mark of immaturity or it's a dangerous generational trend. We don't know the answer to that. I mean, if you're like me and you're generally kind of optimistic, you look at these numbers and you say, well, sooner or later, these people under 30 are going to grow up and pay a whole bunch of taxes, and they're going to realize the beauty of keeping what they earn, right? I remember understanding or having a different view of taxes before I was 30 and when I was over 30. It's sort of like magic. Turned out my dad was right. If you're wondering, incidentally, about this socialism question, Republicans preferred capitalism to socialism 11-1. Democrats were evenly split on capitalism and socialism in America today. So maybe these folks under 30 who, a third of them say socialism is better, maybe they'll just grow up. The trouble is maybe they won't just grow up because in point of fact, we are changing our tax system. A lot of these people will grow up and never face any taxes. Right now, 40% of American adults who work face no federal tax liability at all. Now, most of them don't realize that. You find that most of them still say their federal taxes are too high, even though they literally pay zero federal taxes. 40% are paying no taxes. That went up by 6 percentage points under the last so-called conservative president. It went from 34% to 40% under George W. Bush, who pulled more and more Americans out of having skin in the game as citizens paying for their government. Under Barack Obama, this time next year, that will be 49%. And another 11% will pay less than 5% of their income in federal taxes. In other words, 6 in 10 Americans will be paying nothing or next to nothing for the federal government. How can you ask people to have a sense of responsibility about how much the government is spending and what they're spending the money on when they're actually not paying for it? This is a purposive strategy. This is not just a question of what they call fairness. This is a purposive strategy of pulling more and more people into the net takers category from the net makers category. The reason for this is it's very efficient to tax you and only you. It's very efficient to find the biggest sources of money and take it exclusively from that. You have a smaller and smaller group of people who have a harder time protesting and who are a smaller voice in opposition to the growth of government. And furthermore, it's just efficient to take a lot of money from a relatively small number of people. This is really what we're facing, and this is the strategy that the left is giving us today. The percentage of Americans that will pay nothing will rise. There's no reason that in 5 years it won't be 60% or 65%, and the percentage that will be paying will shrink, and so will their political voice. The strategy on the left is to increase this percentage, to lower the political power of people who pay, and to bring us a social democracy. This is what they are trying to do. They are working flat out to make sure that taxes and free enterprise are not a mainstream economic issue. So what is our strategy? What does our strategy have to be to make sure that we don't lose this? The first point is to remember that free enterprise, as Thomas Jefferson reminded us, is not just an economic argument, it's a cultural argument. We're a rich country, and in an already rich country, money is not really about the money. Entrepreneurship is not about the money. Freedom is not about the money. Now, I'm a professional economist. It took me a long time to throw off my chains and say money is not about the money. It's actually a subversive thing to say in my field. But it's true in this country that when you talk to entrepreneurs don't say, you know, the reason I do this is I'm going to just get as rich as I possibly can. Money is just a way to keep score. And in a free market economy, it's a great blessing that we have a way to keep score, that people can keep what they earn, and that we do reward merit. That's the life in life. That's the reason that we get up in the morning and we really want to achieve, is that we believe that we can be rewarded for achievement. But in a rich country, we have to realize that entrepreneurship and creativity is its own reward, and that, in point of fact, is at stake. We will lose this battle until we make the moral case for capitalism. That's what it boils down to. Not just the economic case for capitalism, the moral case for capitalism. It is still a mainstream thing to say, but we're losing that, and we have to take back the moral high ground now. That's strategy number one. Strategy number two that we have to remember is what fairness means. I heard all the way through the last presidential campaign that fairness means income redistribution. It's not fair that a lot of you have more than a lot of your neighbors. It's not fair. It's evidence of unfairness that some people have a lot and other people don't have so much. That's a very radical point of view. In point of fact, most Americans find that fairness is more related to the concepts of freedom and merit. Most Americans think that fairness has to do with being rewarded for hard work and being rewarded for exploiting talents and passions. That's what most Americans think fairness is. And I'll give you an example of how Americans really see fairness. For a long time, I did work on the estate tax, the much hated inheritance tax. And I was doing work on charitable giving and how it was affected by inheritance taxes. And I was talking to a lot of people, rich, middle class, and poor. And one of the weird things that I found in my research is when I went out and I talked to poor people, they hate the estate tax every bit as much as rich people do. And I would say, but you don't understand, the estate tax is really efficient for you because it's only going to hit people who have a lot of money, a lot more money than you do, and it's going to pay for services that are mostly going to go to you. And they say, you don't understand to me. They would say, no, you don't understand. I don't care how efficient it is. The estate tax makes us less free, and it's not fair. And it's not fair because I don't care if the people who are hit are wealthy people. I don't want a government that's predatory, that taxes people just because it can. That's not the kind of country I want to live in. In other words, Americans, even poorer Americans, at least those who work, have a strong sense of the morality, the expressiveness with which we take things away from people by force. That's the reason that the estate tax polls at about 30 to 35% even among poor people. It's an extraordinary thing. Now, if you go to, I was in academia for a long time, you go to academics and you say, how come the poor hate the inheritance tax? They'll say they live under a false consciousness. They falsely think that they might get rich someday. That's completely wrong. Now, and liberals, generation after generation, don't understand that Americans care about fairness. And Americans don't think it's right for the government to be predatory. There's a famous case in which George McGovern in 1972, in his presidential run, he was at a rubber boot factory in Ohio. And he was talking about the inheritance tax, and these are all working stiffs, all lower middle class people, all blue collar people who were never going to pay a dime in the estate tax. And he said, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to raise the estate tax to 100%. And he got booed off the stage. And they couldn't figure it out. They couldn't. Look, this is so good for these people. They don't get American culture. They didn't get it then, and they don't get it now, which is why we have to own the cultural arguments if we want to win. And the first way to do that is to take back the concept of fairness, because we own it, and we can exploit it. Our notion of fairness is Americans' notion of fairness. The third strategy is that we need real solutions. You know, right now, you look at the numbers, and the Republicans are going to have 40 Senate seats or fewer. The House of Representatives has imploded for conservatives. I don't even care about Republicans and Democrats. We're talking about conservatives here, free market advocates. You know, you'll take them wherever you can get them, Republicans or Democrats, right? The White House, it's turning out that Barack Obama is the liberal he said he was going to be, which, you know, Republicans seem shocked that he said, I'm a liberal, and then he turns out to be a liberal, and, you know, there's this, you know, the Republican faces all go white. We're getting what we expected, what we should have expected at least. So the question is, what's a good conservative to do? And here's what conservatives tend to do. They say, find me a savior. Find me the next guy that's going to give me the ideas that we want and save this country. That's wrong. That's a mistake. 2009 is a huge opportunity for the conservative movement. It's an opportunity to develop the ideas that are mainstream and they're going to win again, and the ideas that we in the intellectual movement, from the American Enterprise Institute to the Leadership Institute to all of the work that so many of you are involved in philanthropically as volunteers and in terms of your day-to-day efforts. The intellectual movement has to be involved in setting the idea agenda and downloading that idea agenda onto the next generation of leaders. We can't have the conversation anymore, who's the next savior? We have to say, what are the next saving ideas? And then the free market for leaders will produce lots and lots of ambitious men and women, and we can say, here's what you have to say. Here's what you need to believe. 2009 is our opportunity to come up with the vector of ideas that can win again. And if we waste it by simply trying to find the next big personality that has the best chance we think of winning and trying to pick the winner and game the markets and just put money behind the person, we're missing the opportunity and we'll probably lose again. That's what we say. We need, in our third point of strategy, to come up with real solutions. Here's my last word, and then we can do questions and answers. At least we can do questions. I don't know if I'll have answers. It's easy to become frustrated and to get down about the current environment, but we shouldn't. This is not the worst of times. In a way, this is the best of times, because in all challenges lie great opportunities, as we know. Over the last 8 years, the conservative movement has suffered a lot of malaise. And the reason has been this. We've had leaders in Congress and in the White House who paid lip service to free enterprise, but didn't live it. You know, we should have had tea parties for the prescription drug bill. We should have, but we didn't. And we didn't because we were demobilized, because the president was saying, I'm a free enterprise fan, but acting in a different way. That caused horrible malaise in the conservative movement. Now we got somebody who's saying what he thinks. Now we have a Congress and a president who are openly hostile to the free enterprise movement. Now's our time. Now we actually know what we're up against. We can mobilize. We can show the leadership that it really takes. And that's when we can win again. If you don't believe me, think back to the late 1970s, the last time we had a truly hostile president in Congress. And incidentally, when Jimmy Carter got elected president, there were 38 Republican senators. And the conservative movement actually saw itself stabbed again and again by an openly hostile Congress and an openly hostile president, and the result was the greatest gift that the conservative movement ever gave to the United States, which was Ronald Reagan. We can do that again, but it's really up to us. Now is the time, if this is going to happen again, if the free enterprise movement is going to be ascendant, we will come up with the ideas, we will demand the rhetoric, we will mobilize the philanthropy, and we will show the leadership. If it's going to happen, it's going to happen because of you and because of me. Thank you.
Told you he was going to make a great presentation. Before we take questions, I would like to ask Arthur to give us a little summary about the American Enterprise taken over. It happens that I was there on their senior in 1971-72, which he didn't know when he came to visit. but I think it would be appropriate if you could a little bit about the history and activities currently.
Thank you, Mort. I'd be delighted. AEI was formed in 1943. AEI has grown a lot since then, but has enjoyed the same mission over its last 66 years, and I hope over the next 66 years as well. AEI is based on three principles: expanding liberty, increasing individual opportunity, and defending free enterprise. That's why we are the American Enterprise Institute. There are a lot of conservative organizations that do a lot of things that we don't do, but we consider ourselves to be as close as one can get to the brain of the free enterprise movement. That's our mission. That's why we believe that we're put on earth. Currently, AEI has 200 full-time employees, including 60 full-time scholars and 75 part-time scholars. Our 60 full-time scholars are all based in Washington, D.C. at our offices at 17th and M Street. Our 75 part-time scholars are scattered around the country, and our remaining 140 full-time staff are research assistants, administrative assistants, support staff, helping our scholars run full-time. We're basically organized in three divisions in equal parts: economics, foreign and defense policy, and social policy and politics. Our economics team has gotten a lot of attention of late since the financial meltdown. Our very well-known economists include Peter Wallison, Alex Pollock, Kevin Hassett, Vincent Reinhardt. These are people that you see a lot if you like to watch the cable talking head shows. You see our people a lot talking about their causes and consequences of the current financial crisis. We have the distinction of having predicted the meltdown of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and the consequent meltdown of the financial system in 1999. I say that with some pride, but I also have to say with a little less pride that we were unsuccessful in influencing the debate in doing that. There's a lesson in that. It's good to be right, but it's even better to have everybody understand that you're right and have policy work better as a result of that. Policies that you're really familiar with that came out of largely came out of AEI in the late 1970s. Robert Bork was doing his seminal work on regulation that led to the deregulation agenda of Ronald Reagan at AEI. In the mid-1980s, AEI scholars from Michael Novak to Charles Murray were talking about the end of welfare as we knew it and suggesting welfare reform policies that 10 years later translated into welfare reform and saved the lives of literally millions of poor Americans, or at least gave a future to millions of poor Americans in this country. In the 1990s, work that came out of AEI was very largely related to the defeat of nationalized health care at the very beginning of the first Clinton administration. Nationalized health care that is coming back and will be there. Just over the last few years, the policy that you probably most associate with AEI is the surge in Iraq. The surge policy in Iraq was conceived of in the 11th floor conference room at AEI. And I tell you, it's a great source of pleasure to be part of an organization that had a policy that was so successful for our national security. But here's where it really came home. Right after I took the job as president of AEI, I was going back to Syracuse. I was to finish up my classwork, to finish up the classes I was teaching at Syracuse. And sitting next to me was a guy who was just coming back from Iraq, and he was going to Fort Drum in north of Syracuse. And I said, "So how's it going over there?" And he said, "Well, I was deployed on the first day of the surge." And I figured he wasn't going to. You ever heard of the American Enterprise Institute and the surge policy and General Jack Keane and Fred Kagan and all this kind of stuff? So I didn't bring that up. I just said, "So how did that surge policy go? How did the surge work?" He said, "It was a miracle." He said, when I got to Iraq, Iraq was lost. It was certain to be a humiliating military defeat. And we knew that there were certain political factions in the United States that wanted us to lose. And they wanted us to lose because they thought we were wrong. And we were going to lose. It was going to be humiliating. We're going to leave. And 30 years from now, we're going to look back at that as the beginning of the end of American greatness. And now, he said, 2 years later, it looks like we're going to win. He said, you never know, but this has saved thousands of lives of American servicemen and thousands of lives of Iraqi civilians. That's what this policy did. And maybe 30 years from now, we'll look back on this as the beginning of a democracy movement, of the center of the American ideal in the Middle East. He said, it's truly a miracle. He said, I am so thankful that our government did that. And I thought to myself, I am so thankful to be part of an organization that helped our government understand that what it was doing was wrong and how it could change, because winning was the only option. So that's what AEI means, and how AEI and the intellectual movement, the Leadership Institute, the whole fabric of the world of ideas among conservatives and lovers of free enterprise, how this can translate into changing lives, even saving lives, and why what you care about and what you support, why it matters so much.
Questions?
Okay, I'll pick them here. I'll start right over here in the corner, sir.
We are the greatest debtor nation in the world. Starting 30 years ago, we took out our national credit card, our personal credit cards, and today we are in the mess we're in. During Bush, we had a structural deficit of about $500 billion a year. Now we're looking at a structural deficit of about $1 trillion a year under the Democrats. The Republicans came out about 6 weeks ago, said, oh, look at us. We have a plan. We'll only be $600 billion a year in a structural deficit. Besides Ron Paul, is there anybody else in this town that thinks even a $600 billion a year structural deficit is anything less than theft, intergenerational theft? I mean, is there any hope out there that anybody in any party can say, this is wrong, and we simply cannot keep up this standard of living unless we keep burying our kids in debt?
The debt issue economically has a lot of facets to it, and I want to bring it back to one that I think is really critical to point out. When we talk about economics, we always tend to divorce it from values. There's this notion out there that the left is peddling that free markets degrade moral character. The problem really is that bad moral character degrades free markets. That's really what's going on in the current financial situation. The fact is that people walked away from mortgages, and that people are demanding corporate welfare, and that we had bad corporate governance and no oversight, and corrupt politicians accepting campaign contributions from Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, including the current president. That's a question of character. That's a question of honesty. Now, when it gets to this question of debt, how do we deal with it? Well, to begin with, we have one thing. Let me tell you the one good thing before we talk about all the bad things about debt. Here's one good thing about debt. It is this. We have lots and lots of people all over the world that, even in spite of the current crisis, want to lend us money. The reason is because we're a great country, and we're a free country, and nobody expects yet the government to come and take over a whole bunch of bank accounts. In other words, these people in dictatorships all over the country still want to park their cash here because they believe that freedom is going to continue to reign in the United States, and it's going to be a safe place to park their money. Now, when they do that, of course, we have to be in balance between the money that we take into our financial system with what goes out, which is to say the imports that we buy that are balanced against our exports. That's really the only good part about the fact that people outside America still believe in America. A big part of the problem with the debt is the fact that Americans have a values deficit with respect to how much we save for the future. The average American household is carrying $18,000 before this crisis, before the middle of 2008, was carrying $18,000 in consumer debt, only half of which was car debt. In other words, $9,000 of which on average was, for all intents and purposes, credit card debt. 2/3 before this crisis of families were rolling credit card balances from month to month. That's a big problem if we really care. You can say, hey, we're optimistic. That's a great virtue. No, I don't buy it. In fact, what that tells us is that we simply don't have a concept of a values-based concept of putting off current consumption. That's a cultural issue that we need to deal with. That, in fact, that's something that conservatives need to talk about with respect to the character of individuals. Once we get that under control, once we get the individual behavior under control, then we start actually seeing changes in macroeconomic conditions. But in point of fact, you are correct. We can't carry this much debt and not expect to pay it off at some point unless we're going to get into an inflationary spiral and we're going to inflate our way out of this kind of debt. And that has moral implications as well. So Ron Paul, I don't exactly economically, most economists think that his sentiments are correct, but his prescriptions wouldn't necessarily work. Going back to the gold standard, we need a more serious conversation from more serious politicians about what this means from individual character all the way through macroeconomics. Yes, sir. Yeah.
I've been intrigued for some time as the extent to which we understand who our friends are. I'm thinking of GE, which used to be a supporter of Ronald Reagan, and now is trying to force us all to buy these curlicule light bulbs. And I'm thinking of Warren Buffett, who is a big opponent of, he's been very much in favor of the estate tax, apparently because Berkshire Hathaway is able to buy small businesses that are obliged to sell because the owners have to pay all these taxes. Do you have any sense about, any comments about how we orchestrate our political movement without the support of all these people that we used to, these institutions that we used to count on?
The big business, of which I'm tremendously fond, and so are you, has an irritating tendency to try to climb over the White House fence. No matter who's in the White House, they want to be buddies with whoever's in the White House, and the reason is because you want to be. You want to have sympathy from sources of political power. We understand that our political system and our economic system are really intertwined, and so you will see crazy things. Big companies that are on board with nationalized healthcare or cap and trade environmental policies or something that doesn't really make sense. And the reason is because they don't want to be in the wrong side of a vindictive president and a nasty Congress. In other words, look. The bottom line is the bottom line, and there's one thing that shareholders can agree on. They don't agree on politics, they don't have the same values, but there's one thing they can all agree on, which is please, please stop the free fall in our share prices. And they will punish boards of directors, and boards of directors will fire executives unless they can stop that. And they think that the most efficacious way to do it is by producing curly-Q light bulbs and caving into crazy health care plans and everything else in between. So that's what's going on here. Here's the silver lining. Here's the good part about it. They're not the action in the economy anymore. Barack Obama sees the future of America that has three parts: big government, big unions, and big business. He wants Eisenhower's America back because the government can manipulate the economy. All the major companies, if things go the way that they are, Barack Obama and the Congress are going to be suggesting that there be a government trustee on every public board of directors in the next few years. You know this is coming, or at least every single one that's got any kind of government money in it. This is already, the idea has already been floated on editorial pages. We're going to see this. And you say, well, my goodness, that's just like a social democracy, because of course it is. But the good part about it is that the big companies, the companies in the Dow Jones Industrial Average, are yesterday's news. Before this recession came around, 85% of new jobs in this country were being created by companies with 100 or fewer employees. And during the recession, it's 100% of new jobs are being, because not that many jobs are being created, but 100% of new jobs now are being created by small businesses. These are not public companies. These are companies that are owned by you. A lot of you own these companies. You are the action in this economy. Incidentally, how are we going to take back the separation between government and the economy? How are we going to take back free enterprise? It's by figuring out what small business people and entrepreneurs really need and having a policy that caters to them instead of caters to General Motors, Chrysler, the United Auto Workers, and all the things that are yesterday's economy that are basically vacuuming up the credit and resources that should be going to entrepreneurs in the first place. We should be a pro-small business movement. And if we do that, forget Walmart, forget General Electric, forget Chrysler. I mean, I hope they prosper, I hope they create jobs, and I hope they help our economy, but I know they're not the engine of the new economy, and that's what we need to be focusing on. Here in the back, yes, sir.
Both the previous questions have touched on this, although they've glanced off the side of it. How does a conservative movement rescue itself and rescue the remnant of the free enterprise system when the free enterprise system itself is first in line with its handout for a bailout? So if times are good, we keep the profits, we want the government out. And the minute things go south, they're the first ones wanting the government in simply to bail them out. How do you preserve a free enterprise system when your captains of industry all seem to have that notion?
Well, first of all, I would not equate captains of industry with free enterprise. I would say that the personification of free enterprise is not the CEO of Goldman Sachs. The personification of free enterprise is you. We own the free enterprise system. We're the bosses of this country, and we maintain or lose free enterprise on the basis of our leadership and our energy and our sport. You don't count on Goldman Sachs or any big companies, because in point of fact, they want to privatize gains and socialize losses. That's what they want to do. And if they can, they will. And we're seeing it, right? So, and this is just how the incentives work. The reason that they can do it is because our country and our leaders are abdicating our responsibilities to let markets work. You know, the extraordinary thing is this. We are hearing that markets dramatically failed in the current crisis. No. The real problem is that markets succeeded. We had a government and a corporate governance structure on Wall Street, and a lot of people walking away from their mortgages, that were trying to make sure that markets continued to fail for decades. Markets won't fail forever. And basically in a free enterprise system, they will hunt you down and kill you. Markets will, if they can, and they did. And that's what's imploded our economy and taken a lot of our pensions with it. But the people that this market meltdown, which is pure market success, what it did, it mostly wiped out the greatest perpetrators. And those perpetrators are recasting themselves with government complicity as victims, and that's what we have to stand up against. So the key is this. We do see a situation in which the government is trying to socialize losses, because that seems like the best way to get us back on track. We have, even though it hurts, even though we want our economy to come back as fast as we possibly can, and none of us like what's happened to our pension, we have to stand up and say, the perpetrators are not the victims, they're the perpetrators. We have to have pain because they tried to go against the market forces that are part of the free enterprise system, and we will not stand up for the socialization of losses. We're the owners of free enterprise, we're the face of it, and we're the ones who are responsible to stand up, even if it's against people that were formerly our allies, and say, this is wrong. This is wrong. You're not standing for free enterprise, you're standing for social democracy. Yes, sir.
You have a strategy for reaching this middle-class entrepreneurial group that you were talking about. Also, do you have a strategy for reaching business schools, MBA programs, and getting businessmen more oriented toward thinking there is a political dimension other than just being in a close relationship with the White House?
Right. The key, the intellectual movements from academia to think tanks have traditionally been about supply, not so much about demand for our ideas, and we're getting smarter about that fast. We're working with, our basically our sister organization, our great friends in Washington, the Heritage Foundation. We're talking. And we're collaborating on projects right now to reach out in an educational way to students around the country, to people who are willing to learn around the country. And what we're trying to do is with the content, the curriculum that comes from we should be thinking of ourselves as curricular organizations, as idea-producing organizations that will form the next generation of people who can use those ideas. And in so doing, we should be completely complementary to the Leadership Institute. The Leadership Institute has been in the vanguard of reaching people. We should be at the vanguard of creating the ideas that we give through these types of organization to people. So the task in 2009, we're talking about with our friends at Heritage, is how we can better map out the whole ecosystem of ideas and link more explicitly to organizations like Morton's so that we can reach people more efficaciously. We have, at AEI, we have a whole cultural outreach program that we're just launching that has AEI Digital that's working in the area. We're launching, we just this week are launching a major new blog. We're doing social networking for the first time in a very serious way. We have a major relaunch of our website. At the same time, we're undertaking major excavation in our PR efforts, and we're launching AEI educational outreach, which I talked about very briefly, but we're starting a Capitol Hill classroom where politicians and executives actually will come to Capitol Hill, where AEI will be providing an actual explicit curriculum on all the things that we do. It's the first time. So we're seeing ourselves as not just as scholars, but we're seeing ourselves as educators. That's a very big philosophical change, and one that I think is going to yield big results. Thank you. Ma'am.
I wonder how we can harness this workforce that's pretty highly educated that have lost their jobs because of this economy, and certainly in certain pockets. I know one firm in Georgetown had to let about 50 architects go. Now, I know all those people probably did not vote the conservative way. So, is there a way to get them to sign petitions or to march or do something on behalf of their employers that were so sad to have to let them go? And this is all over the country, and it's not so much here in the Washington area because we're in this little pocket of, we are in an area that has not seen the problem so greatly.
That's right.
Thank you.
Sure. We're in the only part of the United States that is the center of a growth industry. The stimulus was basically a government stimulus, and that means that all the government and the derivative industries to government are doing fine. I mean, not as fine as they'd like to, but a lot better than, if you go to Southern California, homes over $1 million have dropped 52% in value. They're dropped more like between 15 and 25% in value in the Washington area. That's being propped up by federal tax dollars that are being sent from Southern California, are propping up the housing market here in Washington, D.C. That's, I think you agree with me, that's just not right that that's happening here. I would like the most pain, I mean, notwithstanding the fact that we all live here, I would like the most pain to be felt in the center of government power. Yet that is never the case, it turns out. Talk about privatized gains and socialized losses. The government is really the center of that. So how do we, the people who are feeling pain in Washington around the country, who probably didn't vote for the free enterprise movement or the free enterprise line, I mean, there weren't that many choices for free enterprise in the last election, frankly. But even if there were who would have had more liberal sentiments, time will bring people around if we have the right message. If we say we're serious about transforming the economy more toward the small business entrepreneurial economy, we will be offering a structure for the economy that will absorb people, and they will see economic growth that's half of what it should be, and a recovery that's extremely slow. It takes a long time. It takes a generation before groups of people can be brought back. You can't. It doesn't take this is not like Europe, where a political party can dissolve in 6 months and another one can form in 3 months. Things move a lot slower than that. But the longer we take to start this, the longer it's going to take. This is, folks, we're in the beginning of a 10 and 20 year movement here to retake this. But we have to start it right now, and especially right now because this is our big opportunity time to make some real progress along these lines. But these are the structural elements of actually how to get some of these folks back by the time they're in their 40s and 50s, is voting in a way that offers the most promise for the most people and the most freedom. Yes, sir.
Last question.
Yeah.
I attribute a lot of the malaise of the new electorate under 30 to education in secondary schools and then college lacking any emphasis, even a description of what capitalism is. And I think AEI would be a perfect instrument to be able to reach out. You're bucking the NEA in doing that, because the NEA, I think, is largely responsible for the omission of those features in high school and in college curriculum. Yet you look at the people under 30, how they voted in the last election. Had they voted the way everyone else did, it would have been a horse race.
Sure. The academic establishment is hostile to free enterprise. That's just a fact. It's not even worth pretending it's not a fact. Not even for them. It's not even worth pretending it's not a fact. I mean, and not just teachers' unions. We're talking about the overwhelming majority of college faculties. I mean, Chris and I have a background at the Maxwell School of Public Affairs, which is the most elite school, graduate school of public affairs in the United States. In a poll of the faculty of this elite policy school, 96% of the professors were Democrat or further left. A significant number were further left. I mean, where are you going? I mean, what's the space over there? The world work.
It doesn't work.
Okay, perfect. And this is why it's so critically important that organizations that are dedicated specifically toward teaching have the resources from people who care, like you, Leadership Institute, Heritage, AEI, all of the organizations that we're talking about, to stocking the system with ideas and figuring out the ways to get in front of people, because we have to present alternatives. We can't count on the general means of educational production to carry our water. They're simply not going to. The only way that we're going to win is to work around them with the energy of people who could be sympathetic to the things that we do. And that takes a whole lot of support. It takes a lot of energy, it takes a lot of money, and it takes a lot of human capital. And that's what we're dedicated to doing.
Great. Thank you so much. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'm confident that you agree with me that Arthur Brooks is a welcome addition to the conservative leadership, and I expect him to do great things for the right principles for a long, long time. As a token of appreciation, it's my honor to present you one of the Leadership Institute's Adam Smith ties.
Thank you, Morton.
Thank you. Professor Milton Friedman wore these ties almost every day of his life, and there it is. Anyone here interested in purchasing ties? We have a wide selection of designs. After this event, you can go up to the fifth floor. Kathy Graham, my assistant, will be happy to show you what we have along these lines, and also the ladies' Adam Smith scarves. Kathy, are you in here? There she is. She'll be available to provide them to you. I invite you all to join us on Wednesday, June 3rd, for our next Wednesday Wake Up Club breakfast. We're going to feature a different kind of speaker. We're going to have here Chris Simcox, who is president of the Minutemen Civil Defense Corps. So